On today's episode, I'm chatting with Dr. Mark Rackley. Dr. Mark is an experienced adolescent and adult psychologist with nearly 20 years in mental health, having worked across schools, hospitals, trauma centres and the NHS. Now, running his own practice in southwest London, he's passionate about destigmatising mental health and hosts the podcast I Have Issues, where he explores mental health topics with leading experts. How are you today, Mark?
I'm very good, thank you, Johnny, and thank you for having me on. I was at yoga this morning, so I try and practice what I preach with my patients. I talk about yoga and looking after your mind. So, yeah, nice and zen.
Oh, that's a good place to be. I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah.
We met at the Banquet of Brothers and we didn't get the opportunity to have much conversation. It was a very busy evening and it was a fun evening. It was a confronting evening in many ways, but I'm really glad that I get to...
That kind of threw me a little bit.
No, I wasn't expecting it. And I think that was a good thing. At first, I think it beautifully highlighted all of the reasons that we were there in a way.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, it was something I thought, I wasn't sure. And then once we kind of got into it, I thought, this is pretty cool, actually. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think that was the point of it, wasn't it? And it was to show us, I mean, we were sort of asked not to talk too much about the things that we talked about over the evening, so we won't do that. But just even the simple things like looking into another man's eyes, I was surprised how uncomfortable that felt.
Yeah. Yeah,
that was interesting to me. I wouldn't have thought that until it happened, but it was very interesting to me. So, yeah. How did you feel with that?
Yeah, it was fascinating because like that kind of stuff, because I'm a psychologist, like I love all that stuff, and because it's about human behavior and kind of what the edges of what makes us comfortable and uncomfortable. And I found that too. It's like, because I was looking into the eyes of a stranger, and especially because like I live in London, like you don't do that. You naturally avoid people's gaze. So when you were asked to put yourself into that position, I felt uncomfortable. But then I kind of thought, this is good. Like, just go with this. Go with it and just see where this takes you. So, but initially, I was like, I don't like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what really hit me was the emotional roller coaster that happened in seemingly a very short amount of time of finding it really funny and awkward, almost to a point of then it moved over to sort of like, do I need to puff my chest up a bit here? He's looking at me, I'm looking at him. It was a strange ordeal to go through, but I was really grateful for it.
Yeah, me too. I think it's interesting you said that because one of the things that I suppose I felt, it brings up vulnerability, doesn't it? Like you start to feel vulnerable. And then when you feel vulnerable, you want to make yourself feel safe. So you're like, you putting your chest, it was like you're kind of correcting yourself, saying, I need to feel safer. I need to deal with the vulnerability. And of course, like the vulnerability is like telling you something, isn't it? It's like, well, why are you vulnerable? And what is that? Because you are safe. Like nobody's hurting you in this space. But like on an emotional level, we're like, oh, I don't like this. So I thought it was fascinating. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, and I think what you've just hit upon is maybe something we can talk and look into is how those situations in our life, those experiences mirror and tap into, I'm going to use the word emotional triggers, the events that happen in our life that we then apply meaning to, and then those meanings play out in different stories in our lives that cause those triggers. And it's interesting you say that. So in those situations where I'm looking into another man's eyes, my experience of that has always been aggression, but it wasn't an aggressive situation. So it was a very interesting little bit of turmoil for me to look into. That's interesting that you say that.
Yeah. And isn't that again interesting for you? Like that looking into somebody else's eyes made you feel unsafe because that was your understanding or your experience of what that is for you. And but then to kind of course correct that in a safe space and go, actually, this is okay. So,
well, that's so beautiful about what you just said, because in essence, what you're saying there, or what you're alluding to, is that when we go to therapy or we work with somebody, we are talking about our past because we're trying to understand those moments where we made those meanings, so we can theoretically go back and say, okay, that's no longer what that means. So moving forward, how do we want it to be instead? And I just think that's a wonderful example that you've sort of in an opening conversation just brought out there. So
it's so true though. Why you say it, that's exactly it. Because we're like, I kind of feel, because I'm Irish, obviously, I talk a lot, but But Irish culture is all about stories. So I kind of feel sometimes like, what's my job? I just listen to stories all day. And I love that. But the stories that happen to us that are written for us through no fault of our own in our childhoods or things that happen to us, then we have to make sense of those stories because that's we're designed and built to do that. But the stories in terms of what's happened and then how we understand the story and then how the story then plays itself out in the rest of our lives. When people come to therapy, you have to pick all that apart because you can't rewrite the story, but you have to find a way to be able to hold that story differently going forward because that's the stuff then that tends to make you unwell. If there's which most people have, there's a huge challenge in being able to actually live your life, but taking all of these stories forward with you.
Yeah, and that's significant because what you are answering there is probably the biggest barrier to entry when it comes to therapy, which is why do I want to drag up all of the past? Well, it's because you haven't understood it in a way in which it's positively impacting your life. You're determined to believe that story that you needed to tell yourself when you was 8 years old in order to process and move forward. And you're still playing out that meaning in your life and it's no longer working because you made it up when you was 8 and now you're 28.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so true, Johnny. And when you're dealing with that, then of course the brain works with the story that way. It affects the way you relate to things. It affects your approach to certain situations and how you understand them. And of course, that's the stuff that it's the ongoing damage that those stories can do to a person because of the initial damage that they did, just keeping on perpetuating itself throughout the person's life. So I often laugh when I'm talking to my patients. I often say, like, there's a reason we have to go into your childhood because they're the formative years. They're the years when we're starting to understand the world and we're understanding ourselves and we're understanding what it is to be in relationships and authority and all the rest of it. And if the damage is done there and it's significant enough, it's going to grow with you. It's going to grow. And so we have to go back to the point where the damage was done to understand it, to help you heal. Yeah.
I mean, I want to delve into a bit about you in a moment, but you've got me so into this conversation here, and it's like it's the understanding nightmare. I was like, this is such a good conversation, but it's the idea that I suppose in some ways people believe that they have to go back in therapy and process an event. But what I've come to understand, and I can only speak for myself on this front, is that actually I don't know if it's necessarily the event that we process. I think it's the emotional impact because the event has happened. If you're fortunate in life, it won't happen again. But the emotion that gets brought up within that moment, that will happen again. You will be scared again. You will visit rejection again. You will be angry. You will have all of those emotions.
Yeah.
And it's your relationship with that emotion, the meaning that you put on that emotion, that I suppose in those moments dictates your response. And we hear all the time, you should respond instead of react. And I think in some ways that's almost anger inducing because that person that's reacting probably doesn't know how to respond. They don't have that capability. That's why they're reacting. And it's possible that they're doing that because they haven't been able to process the emotions. They've been trying to process the event, asking themselves questions like, why did that happen? That shouldn't have happened, which is a cycle, isn't it, that we get stuck in. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, I think you've switched on my psychologist brain now, so apologies. You're going to get a huge brain dump here.
I can't wait. Let's do it.
You're like, switch them off. Absolutely. Because going on to the mechanics of your brain is hardwired to process information and to make sense of things and to learn and grow. And when we're young, we're exploring the world and we're learning all kinds of things. But we're also learning things like what it is to have a mother and a father and to be a sibling and what a school means and a teacher means and all of these kinds of things. And if you chuck in things like culture and religion and all of those things, and we're learning what all of this stuff means. And so the brain is kind of understanding all of this stuff. And they're the kind of the layers of understanding that we create as we grow. Now, of course, a big part of that is we're hugely influenced by the learning and the way people are teaching us, i.e., families, and how we then fit into a family and how the family then relates to us and we relate to them. And if we're lucky enough, we have families that let us be ourselves and we get unconditional love and it's all wonderful. But most people don't get that. So, like, what we get introduced to is we get introduced to, okay, well, we love you, but like, don't let us down and don't cross that line. And you need to kind of to behave like this. So, what we then get introduced to, and these are the biggies, we get introduced to the experience of shame and guilt, and they come from the environment. And from my work of 20 years doing this job, and I had thousands of patients at this stage I've treated, of all from 12 up into their 80s. And because we're not born with shame and guilt. We don't, when we're born with certain hardwired emotions, they are not it. And when we get introduced to shame and guilt, that's when the most damage can be done, because that then can stay with us in terms of it gets triggered, but also it gets perpetuated. So if we're still with our families and our cultures and religions, then even though we're adults, that doesn't shift because the environment is still facilitating that. So I work with some teenagers and they're struggling with this kind of stuff, but I also work with loads of adults and they're still massively struggling with all of that stuff, but they're struggling with it their whole life because this has been something that hasn't changed because of the fact that they're still living with families and systems and whatever. But that is literally a lifelong thing. So with that, the damage starts when we're young, but then it literally continues right up into adulthood. Sorry,
It's
Johnny.
absolutely
That was a big answer. I did warn you.
honestly, I live for answers like that. I
Mm.
love a full answer, and it made me think a little bit about Carl Rogers' Conditions of Worth,
Yeah,
and
spot
the
on.
idea that we're always performing for the Scooby snack, if you will.
Yeah, but it's so true. Like I'll often use that example of the conditions of worth, which is like, the love is there, the connection is there, but the connection is conditional. So if you do something to disappoint or that brings shame on the family or whatever, then the connection in some cases will be severed. And so the person then has to, again, coming back to Carl Rogers, they're not being their authentic selves. They're not being an individual. They're not self-actualizing. What they're doing is they're living an existence which is to their own detriment, but is keeping everybody else happy, but maybe keeping that person miserable.
And I think it could be something as simple as you think that you're in love with, say, a sport or a genre of film or an
Mhm.
activity in some way, but actually you're not. You're in love with the response that you get for doing that thing from your parents,
Yeah.
let's say. And that disillusion, if you take that for long enough through your life, imagine how out of kilter you'll be if you start that relationship with, say, football at
Mm.
10 and now you're 30 and you've
Mm.
been playing it out for 20 years. I
Mm.
love football, but every time I go to a football game, I feel horrible. And,
Mm.
it's an incredible sort of way to think about it, really.
But listen, that creates, that idea, Johnny, of cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance
Mm.
being like, well, how we actually feel and think, but what we show, there's a massive disconnect there. And cognitive dissonance, like, that'll wreck your head. That will literally
Mm.
wreck your head because that's like, that stuff is like trying to hold that is like, that puts pressure on you psychologically. That means you're basically masking or you're playing a persona in order to people please, but you got to keep that up. And
Yeah.
then the pressure that puts on the person, and then what filters down into your nervous system and how your body is then working. So, like, it's a high price to pay. I say this to my patients all the time. Like, if you don't look after your mental health, like, if you don't address these kinds of things, then you are going to pay the price, not just with your mental health, but your body is going to start to suffer as well. Like it's when it's bad, it's really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I love a client rant, because I
Mm,
feel like once I get that rant from a client, now I'm getting the truth. Now I'm getting the
yeah.
authentic person.
Yeah.
I'm getting their frustrations, their tolerances, their views, their perspectives, the things that they do and don't like, their value systems, their morals, their
Mm,
belief systems. All of that's all
mm,
coming out because they're no longer gatekeeping that. They're just like,
yeah.
I hate everything and this is why.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great place to start. Like I'll often say to my patients, like, I'm really angry. I say, great,
Mm.
great. I'm glad you're angry. They're looking at me like I'm mad. And I say, well, why? I said, because anger is about injustice. Like you feel anger when something, you know, that shouldn't have happened has happened, or that you're angry because you're reacting to an experience that you feel very strongly about. So this is great because now we can understand why you feel angry, what's behind the anger. So, like, all again, I often say to patients, like, your feelings and emotions are pieces of information. Like
Of
they're
course.
such important pieces of information, and so if you don't work with them, then you're missing all that knowledge. That knowledge that could actually really change your life. Actually,
Yeah, and then you have that moment where you're gaslighting yourself, telling yourself you're not angry, you're not this. I spoke to a client recently that had been betrayed, and they said that they had forgiven the person, and this betrayal
mm,
happened like 2 days ago or something, or 2 days before it happened. And I was like, it's very unlikely to be the case. You may have
yeah,
accepted it in some way. I'm not sure
yeah,
you've forgiven yet. That's quite a deep word to use. And
it,
it's that again, it's that self-denial of I don't want to be
yeah.
angry about this, so I'm just going to choose not to be. It's like, no, I don't think emotions work like that.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. Like you're somehow going to tell your brain to which works independently of you. Well, could you just do it that way? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I'm
it
not.
does
I'm
it.
not on. I'm not
Yeah,
on board. So stop.
yeah. It does it for you. Like you don't really get a say.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. So, I mean, that was a wonderful start to this episode. We're like almost 20 minutes in, and yeah, we're really getting into the meat and potatoes of it. But I wanted to go back, and I
Yeah,
wanted to start with what I feel is a very important question, and that
yeah.
is, how did you become Dr. Mark Rackley?
Oh yes. When I saw that question on your run sheet, I thought, I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. So I'm from Dublin. I'm from a good old Irish family, which I feel very blessed to be from. I'm one of five, which is you're probably a small Irish family. And so I grew up with loads of siblings, and which is great. I was always very curious. I was always very interested in people. As a child, things would really excite me, and I'd find things very, very, very interesting. I'd get into stuff, and I honestly didn't really know too much about psychology and kind of what that was. I knew kind of conceptually what it was, but I didn't really know kind of what a psychologist does. I'd never been to therapy or anything like that, and took a psychology degree because. One of my friends actually said to me, I think you'd make a very good psychologist. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I kind of looked into it, and I was interested in the kind of the concepts of what it is that people experience, and also why do we become unwell. I'd also at one point kind of toyed with the idea of being a doctor, a medical doctor, but I couldn't really figure out what I would do as a doctor. So I thought I probably shouldn't do that. I don't know what you want to do there. It's a big field. And so I thought I'd do a psychology degree for a year and see kind of what that feels like. And I mean, it blew my mind when I started it. Like I couldn't get enough of it, Johnny. I was like, I literally was, I'm a bit of a nerd anyway. Like I hoover up information,
Me too.
and
Yes.
I was like, this is brilliant for me. And I was reading all the books, and I became fascinated with what Freud was talking about. And I thought is really, it's not just, really good, good knowledge. I'm loving this. It's changing my mind. It's changing the way I see the world. Like it really had a massive impact on me. So I finished my degree, and then with a psychology degree, you can go off and do all kinds of things. So not everybody becomes a psychologist, but I thought I want to try and do this for a living and actually work with people who struggle with their mental health. So I got onto my training, and in my training, then you actually start to be be trained to be a psychologist and to work with actual patients. And my first placement was in I picked it on purpose. I picked a secondary school in a really dodgy part of Dublin, like bad Dublin. And because I thought, if I can do that, and though, there's going to be baptism of fire for me. And it was. And I did my first year there working with all these kind of very troubled teenagers from dreadful socioeconomic backgrounds, and so I learned a lot, and it was brilliant, but it was hard. It was tough. It was tough. And then for my other training, then I worked in back in Ireland. I don't know if with the Irish history, with all this dreadful clerical abuse from the Catholic Church. There was decades of that had gone on, and there was so many victims came forward. The government set up these specialist clinics, and so I spent a year working with adult victims of child sexual abuse, and again that was baptism of fire. So tough, but I learned a lot. I learned an awful lot. And over those 2 years as well, you have to see a psychologist yourself. So I saw 2 different psychologists, and I had to talk to them about what was going on for me. So yeah, it was great learning. And then after that, I worked in a university in Dublin as a psychologist. I worked with the third level students. And then I moved to London, and I spent 7 years in the NHS. And I feel very proud that I got to do what I did in the work that I did. But when you're on the other side of the NHS, it's not the easiest job in the world. It's difficult being a doctor in the NHS. So then I moved and set up my private practice.
Yeah. I find it really intriguing, the idea of you being like a small boy and having this interest in sort of human behaviour and it spurring on this career. What do you think it was that you noticed as a small boy about people that sort of got that? Because let's face it, I was the same way, so I totally resonate with what you're saying. But it's like, at that age, we probably should be interested in toys and playing sports and being outside. Yeah. And I was interested in those things, but I was also fascinated by people. What was it for you that you found so fascinating?
I think being from a big Irish family, like you're surrounded by, I was always around people, always. And I had loads of cousins and all the rest of it. And I'd want to talk to the adults. And I'd want to, hear what was going on for them. And I was interested in stories, and I found it really fascinating to have somebody talk, and even just listening to the adults talk and listening to what was going on. And for me, because Ireland is a small country, it's not very, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I was always quite fascinated by like the rest of the world and like what's outside of this. And it's like no surprises. Like when I became quite a bit older, I went traveling everywhere because I wanted to see everywhere and I wanted to see it all and to be in those places. So, and feel very fortunate I got to do that. But like for me, it was like I wanted to experience the world. I wanted to experience the different parts of the world and see what that was like. So I felt like as wonderful as Ireland wasn't big enough for me. I needed to get out there, and I needed to do just to see more and experience more. But I think definitely just been around so many people. And also what I love about Irish culture too is like in Irish culture, it's all about songs and stories. And I found myself as a young child, like I'd be listening to all of this stuff. So yeah.
I feel like, especially I've got a fair few Irish friends, and whenever they describe their family and friends, their childhood, there's always these really big characters, really big characters with loads of like storytelling and it's very, very much like a film or a really great novel. And I wonder sometimes whether as well, growing up there, you get exposed to real strong archetypal people, and then you spend the rest of your life sort of testing the notion all the time.
Yeah. No, I would totally agree with that. Like when I bring some of my friends over to Ireland, I often warn them. I said, "Listen, this is a bit this place is a bit mad because it is. It's and I say that out of affection. Like it's like you've got the matriarchs in the family, and which I love, but also there's such strong like cultural identity, and like it's hard to tell the difference between a funeral and a wedding with the way people behave. So there's all of this stuff, which again, it massively influences you. Yeah. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. Yeah. Because I appreciate, maybe didn't at the time, but I appreciate kind of how that sparked my interest in people and stories, and again some of the people that were in my family, which helped me to kind of grow.
I remember a really funny situation. I'm in my mid 40s, and in my early 40s, I had an Irish friend who wanted to. Well, I asked him if I could join the group chat, and he said, "You're not old enough." So, Irish friend had an Irish group chat. He said, "You're not old enough to join the Irish group chat." I was like, "Oh, okay. Is that bad? Is it?" It's like, yeah, it really is. That made me chuckle. So, yeah. But in your 2 decades of working with
Yeah.
people, what's one truth about human suffering or mental health that most of us either ignore or don't want to face, do you think?
I love that question. Mental health is everybody, and it is something that you cannot avoid. And it is something that is a part of what it is to be human. I hate the stigmas, Johnny, around mental health. I hate the stigmas around, well, it's weak people. I can't bear the toxic masculinity nonsense. That stuff is so dangerous. All that stuff is just rubbish. Mental health is the same as your physical health. If we look at what happened with COVID, like, no, you couldn't stop that. That's a virus in the air. That's something that affected all of us. And mental health it's in the air. It's around us. It's something that happens to us. It's something that can happen to any of us. So this idea that, well, like mental health happens to other people, it doesn't. Like if you have somebody in your family who is schizophrenic, has anorexia, has bipolar disorder, has PTSD, their mental health is going to affect your mental health. So we're all connected to it, whether we like it or not. We're all connected to it. So for me, that universal truth is, you might not want to acknowledge that, and you might feel more comfortable because of fear or because of lack of knowledge or whatever it is, that, well, this is something outside of me. This is something that, well, if I'm stoic enough, or I put up all of these defenses, then I protect myself from that. That's nonsense. That is nonsense. That's like saying, well, if I hold my breath, I won't get COVID. And come on, like this idea of it's other people. No, it's you. It's all of us, because we're all connected to it, whether we struggle, whether it's our struggle or not, we're connected to it. So, because I get very passionate about this stuff because it drives me mad. And what we know as well is, because they've done studies on all of this, that's universal. So like mental health's been around for as long as modern humanity. It's there. If we look back into history, it's been there. Like people might have positioned it as demonic possession or whatever, but people were struggling with their mental health because that's what it is to be human. And certainly like the work I do now, but maybe less so, but certainly when I was in the NHS, I worked in a tier 3 service, which is for fairly serious cases of mental health, but not serious enough that you'd be in hospital, but pretty serious. And I had patients from all over the world, literally all over the world. You could, this idea of, well, mental health is just a Western problem. No, it's not. It's not. We just talk about it differently in the West. And we consider it differently and treat it differently, but it's universal. It's everywhere in all cultures and all societies. Yeah.
I love that, because what you're absolutely right. The way you put that, the analogy of using COVID is such a great example, and saying, if you hold your breath and things like that. Because what I think you're saying is that our mental health is very inclusive and dependent and influential on the way that we interact with each other. And it's the idea that if a friend comes to you to talk to you and you don't listen, then that action has an impact on their mental health as well. They don't feel heard. And I think what you're getting to is the idea that how we interact with each other is a massive component of mental health.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge because we all have a social brain, and our social brain connects to other people's brains through mirror neurons. And so that, with kind of group mentality and people change in a group as opposed to when they're on their own. So we're hugely influenced by the social environment. But that same social environment can harm or help your mental health. So some of the things that I hear from my patients is, well, I couldn't tell my mates, or I don't want them to know that I'm struggling with this because I don't want to be judged, or I don't want to be ridiculed or stigmatized. So what you got then there is somebody whose their social environment is harming their mental health because they're already struggling, but they don't want people to know their struggle, which makes their struggle even harder.
And it also, as well, also tells the other person that if they are having that struggle, that they are less than, which then keeps them quiet too.
Totally, totally. Because again, it's that idea, well, like, which I can't bear this nonsense, Johnny. Real men don't struggle with their mental health, or real men, they don't get depressed or whatever. And you're just thinking, well, first of all, what is a real man? And secondly, if that's the case, then why is the suicide rate so high among men? Because something's gone horribly wrong there. That kind of nonsense, like, it really bothers me, because what it creates then, it creates an environment where people feel that there's something wrong with them, or that maybe they're not strong enough or manly enough or masculine enough to be able to manage their mental health, which again is very, very dangerous in terms of what that can actually lead to. Yeah.
So would you say then the one truth about human suffering is that mental health is not an individual situation, it's a collective one?
Totally. It's all our responsibility. It's all our responsibility. So I'm responsible for your mental health, and you're responsible for mine. So if I am going to speak badly to you, if I'm going to treat you badly, if I'm going to be a nasty person, then I'm going to affect your mental health.
Absolutely beautiful answer.
Yeah.
What that does as well is it also reduces the opportunity for judgment, and it almost suggests empathy. It's like recognizing that this thing could happen to any of us. So if we're all gatekeeping each other's mental health, and we're all doing our best to be kind to each other and to listen to each other and to empathize with, because empathy is just understanding the other person, right? Like that, resonating and getting it. So that's a lovely answer, and not one I've heard. Although on reflection, it's quite obvious.
Well, I mean, the thing about psychologists, I often say, we don't tell people things that they don't already know. We just reframe it, and we help them to kind of understand it. But for me, with mental health is, if we all just kind of took a moment to just appreciate and take responsibility that we all hold personal responsibility for how we can influence somebody else's mental health, which I think is a really, it's quite a serious thing, but a really important thing as well.
So, and this is I'll try and put this question delicately.
Yeah.
Because it's just got me thinking. So when a person reaches the point of suicidal thoughts, because most of that is isolation, right? So they didn't communicate how they were feeling, but potentially they didn't have the language to communicate how they were feeling. They didn't know how to. So it becomes this horrible situation where they feel like that is the only option that they have.
That's it. I mean, suicide is it's a suicidal thoughts, and suicide. I try and normalize that. And I know this might sound a bit strange to say that, but I do try and normalize it, because I suppose every week, Johnny, I would talk to patients who have suicidal thoughts. And because you would expect that it's a symptom of somebody's poor mental health. So I try and position it that way, that if you're having suicidal thoughts, that's a symptom. Now, like any other symptom, you have to take it very seriously, but it's there because your mental health isn't good. So we have to tackle the symptom and make sure that that symptom doesn't get worse, so that then you are possibly feeling in a position where those thoughts can turn into actions, or that you are more vulnerable to behaving off the back of those thoughts. So I always try and differentiate. There's a big difference between having suicidal thoughts and then wanting your life to end, because they're two very, very different places to be at psychologically. So you can have suicidal thoughts, but you don't want to die. And the suicidal thoughts are there because you're going through a high period of distress in your life. You might feel very hopeless. You might have very bad depression, which we know changes how the brain works. So we try and put the symptom into context in terms of why you're having that symptom. And then, of course, what you want to do then is treat that symptom. So treating the symptom is you directly tackle what is happening for that person when they're feeling suicidal. You put a safety plan in place. You make sure that they know exactly what they need to do should they feel like that. And then as you're working, not just on that symptom, but on the mental health as a whole, then I'll often say to patients, just the same way let's use depression. When your depression lifts, your energy is going to come back. Your enjoyment of life is going to come back. Your sleep will get better, appetite, all the rest of it. All your symptoms are going to improve. So is this one. So when you're feeling better, the suicidal thoughts will go. But while you're unwell, it's going to sit there amongst all the other symptoms. So very much normalizing it, but also helping the patient feel safe and not feeling scared that they're having those thoughts, because they're obviously very frightening.
This is exactly why I wanted to speak to you, because the idea that them suicidal thoughts is being presented as a symptom makes it immediately independent of you, which means those powerful thoughts don't have to feel like commands or demands, and that they will pass. It's a very hopeful answer. And I like that, because there are some people, myself included, many of us haven't escaped those suicidal thoughts or periods of that. And it's a very intense space to be in. It's very difficult to battle that back. But to think of it as a symptom makes it feel immediately temporary, something that you kind of need to, like having a cold. It's awful when you have it, but you kind of know in like 2 or 3 days you'll be better, or you'll, not better completely, but you'll be well.
Yeah.
So that's a really lovely way of presenting it.
I think it's important, Johnny, to hold that hope, because obviously, like, when a patient has suicidal thoughts, they're very, like I said, they're very scared. Like it's a very difficult place to be psychologically. But I'll often use the example with my patients and say, well, did you have these before you became unwell? And they say, well, no, I didn't actually. And I said, well, that tells us something has changed. So now that you are unwell, you've changed psychologically. And so this is another indicator of the fact that your mental health isn't good right now, because your feelings have changed, your life has changed, your thoughts have changed, how you're thinking about your life has changed. So this is sitting in there amongst all of that. So we need to make sure that change, like you were saying, it's a temporary change, but we got to keep an eye on it to make sure that it's not putting you at risk. So my experience with my patients of dealing with this is it's reassuring, it's validating, it's humanizing, but also it lets them know I'm on it. And like, if you're any of my patients are on this, they know I do not, like, I'm all over this. I am all over this. And not only am I all over this, I'm going to pull in a whole load of other people that are going to be all over it too. So it just lets that patient know that they're safe. We're watching it. We've got all eyes on it. So therefore, then that helps them to feel that despite the frightening place they can get into with the suicidal thoughts, that there's a whole team around me that are helping me through this. So it's very powerful work when you do it. Very powerful. And like when the patient gets through the other side, like it's really cool.
What I love most about that approach and that framing is that what you're encouraging and nurturing the person to do there is to focus on the improvement of mental health rather than not having those thoughts. Because I always say, I get frustrated with the idea that the answer to, I'm having intrusive thoughts, is don't have intrusive thoughts. It's like, talk about an impossible notion. It's just like, how frustrating and how like, that's not going to end well. So it's like focusing on the void. It's like with addiction, like focusing on not doing the thing is rarely a recipe for success. It's often about focusing on what you want to do instead and nurturing that. So I love that reframing and that approach of like, let's focus on improving your mental health. Let's indoctrinate ourselves into what it means to be well instead of what it means to not be well.
Exactly. And I think like that for me it's validating the patient, but also, it's just thinking when you were talking there, it's like when I treat a case of anorexia, you don't say to a patient with anorexia, well, could you not just eat? That's going to shame them, but also they're going to be thinking, what on earth? Did you think I want to starve myself? Like, this is changes that
it's like telling someone who's depressed to cheer up.
Yeah, exactly, John. Like, and it's so demeaning. It's always of absolute importance that the patient is respected, that they know that they are in safe hands, but also that a big part of the work, of course, is they've got to trust me. So if I'm going to say something to you, then you have to trust I'm not dropping the ball, but also that I can stand over what I'm saying to you. That's hugely important, because I'll often say to patients, you might feel very hopeless, but let me hold the hope and then I'll hand it back to you and you can take it back.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. What a lovely thing to hear.
And I mean it when I say that. I mean it, because when you're suicidal, inevitably it goes with hopelessness. So the person can't hold hope. But I'm like, well, I'll hold it all. I'll hold the hope. And then when you start to feel a bit better and you start to feel a bit more hopeful, then you can take it back off me and then you can move on with your life and be hopeful.
Yeah. So having a symbol of hope is hope, isn't it?
It's the most powerful psychological concept there is. It's hugely important.
So I just wanted to circle back to you just before we finished up and finish with what is a very powerful question, and feel free to shut this down if you want to. What is one of the most challenging and emotionally painful things that you've experienced in your life, and what did you learn from it, do you think?
Yeah, when I got that question too, I thought, how do I answer that one? And I suppose I was kind of thinking, do I go professional with this one or go personal? Because I've had quite a lot of challenges in my career, just because of the nature of that. I've had patients die, and as any psychologist would, and that's always very difficult when that happens. But a more personal note, which I think is probably more to do with my life than my career, would have been 10 years ago. My dad sadly died of cancer. And I was working in the NHS at the time, working with my complex patients in the service I was working in. And I have, I suppose, helped lots of people deal with grief and sickness and illness in their family. And when my dad was diagnosed, we knew kind of this couldn't be treated, that this was going to take his life. And so we had about a window of a year roughly to deal with this. And I was in London, my dad was back in Dublin. And of course, that was like a bomb went off in the family when that happened, because he wasn't old at the time. So I was trying to get my head around that, but also thinking, what do I do with this? How do I manage this? So I rejigged I was working full time. So I said to my boss, listen, this is what's happening in my life. Can I compress my hours? So I still would see all my patients, but I'll work 4 days a week. And then every Friday I'll take off. And my boss, they agreed to that. So for 9 months, I flew to Dublin every weekend, because I thought, I'm on borrowed time here. I know I'm going to lose him, and I need to really make sure that I use this time very, very wisely, and that I have the time to be with him and to support my mom and my siblings. So I did that for 9 months. Every weekend I flew home, and every weekend I flew back, and then I got back into my job. And that transition of kind of being home and being in my space and being with my family and dealing with all of this, and then jumping back into my NHS world on a Monday morning. And I'm working with all my patients with their stuff, and I'm holding all their stuff and trying to keep me sane and keep them sane and not lose my mind. That was incredibly difficult and hugely challenging on all kinds of levels. And then when my dad sadly did die, I was thrown into obviously grief like everybody else. And it was obviously a very difficult time for the family and for me. But I had to then, I suppose I took a bit of time off, but then I had to go back into work and again, separate myself from my personal life and sit with people's pain. And that was very difficult, because obviously I wasn't in a great place myself, but I couldn't say to my patients, you know what, I'm just not feeling it today. And it's like, could you maybe just go easy on me? You have to be fully present. So I think what that taught me, obviously, I have huge empathy now for anybody who's gone through that. I know what grief really feels like. So when I talk about it, I've lived it. And also, I think as well, we all know life is precious. I say that all the time, but I didn't enjoy those 9 months when my dad was dying. They were awful months for me. And I'll often say to, when I'm working with patients whose, parents are sick or whatever, or just somebody's going to pass, that the time before they die is going to be very important to you after that person dies, because you'll be able to look back on this and no regrets about conversations or anything like that. So I think it's definitely helped me in the conversations I can have with my patients, but also like lots of other people as well. Before my dad dies, I was like, am I going to be okay? Like I was concerned that I wasn't going to be okay, that I might suddenly not cope with this. I think, you know, what it massively helped me to appreciate is you have to lean into that vulnerability, because that vulnerability is hugely important in terms of what is actually going on for you, and not trying to push it down or think I have to be a certain way, or I have to be brave, or I have to put up this front for everybody else. You don't. You don't. Let yourself be vulnerable. Let yourself feel that, because that's what's going on. And actually, that's the stuff that teaches you, no, not nice lessons, but that teaches you that suffering and trauma is awful, and it's not pleasant, but you can cope, you can let people support you, you can heal. And I suppose that whole experience taught me all of that. So when I'm working with my patients, I don't tell them this story, obviously, but what I do is I try and use my experience to help them to navigate what might help them to work through these difficult times. Yeah.
I mean, firstly, I want to say sorry that that happened. Obviously,
Thank
that's
you.
that must have been a very difficult period of time, which sounds like an understatement, but there's not another way to say it, I don't think.
Yeah, it was
And
tough. It was tough. Yeah.
and secondly, thank you for sharing that, because that is a very intimate part of your life. That must have been tough. But
Mm,
also, what I sort of hear there as well, and it's the beauty of the way that you speak and the way that you translate what you have to say, is I feel as if you've come full circle, in a sense of, in the beginning you talked about mental health as it being everybody's responsibility, and
mm,
that it's a collective experience.
mm,
And then when you think about grief and you think about loss, something in your ecosystem that was there
mm,
and had an impact on you is no longer there anymore. And I mean, and
mm.
that's why it's such a significant and profound experience to grieve.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's a funny one, grief, isn't it? Because it can seem terrifying, and it is terrifying. I love that movie, A Monster Calls. I don't know if you know that movie, where the tree that
No.
represents grief. It's amazing. If you get a chance to watch it, it's very, very good. But in the premise of that movie is this young boy, his mother is dying of cancer, and he has these really like, vivid nightmares. But this big tree is a monster and is coming for him, and the tree represents death and grief. And it can feel like that. I can feel like this is going to consume me. I'm not going to get out of this. This is going to literally, this is going to break me. And it can feel like that. And that, I think that's okay. Like that, if you feeling like that, that's okay. That's what's happening for you. But those intense feelings, they wash over you, but they can feel like they're drowning you. And it's holding that space and having that space where you can say, I'm drowning here and I'm not doing well. And that you, like you said, the system around you then helps you to stay afloat. And it's so important, because with grief can cause all kinds of complications, but also grief can make you feel hopeless and that life isn't worth living. So working through grief is so important to be able to start to live again and to heal. Yeah. But I appreciate it's like nobody wants to do that work, eh? But it's vital to heal, because when you're going through grief, you're battered. So yeah, it's you need to heal. Yeah.
Dr. Mark, you are literally a beacon of hope, mate. I'm so grateful for you and your time today, and
Oh no, John,
all that you shared. Honestly, I really am.
only a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope it's helpful. I hope it's useful and patient of not your listeners.
Just as we bring this conversation to an end, just the
Yeah.
final question: is there anything you'd like to pass on to people that can help them with their self-development?
Yes, absolutely. Please see yourself and everybody else as worthy of consideration, worthy of seeing another human as a fragile person, as somebody who can be vulnerable, somebody who might be going through a hard time, somebody who might be presenting a version of themselves that isn't actually what's going on. For me, like if I could tell your listeners anything, it's hold space for other people, hold space, because we all need people to hold space for us. If we hold space for even strangers, if that's just a smile or a hello or a holding open the door, those very small acts of kindness can go a really long way. And even if the space is small, it doesn't matter. Just hold space for other people, because that space, just the impact that that can have, but also it lets other people know that they have value and that they are being considered by another human, even if that person is a stranger.
What wonderful, wonderful advice to pass along. Thank you for that. And just before you go, could you just let people know where they can find you, socials, your website, and any
totally. Thanks, Donny.
So, want them to know about?
Yeah, no, that's all good. So Instagram at Dr. Mark Rackley. Do loads of kind of bits and pieces on there. And my podcast, I Have Issues, that's on Spotify, that's on Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, it's on there, that's probably a bit more, what would we say about I Have Issues? It's a bit more of a deep dive. So if you want to understand the neuroscience of ADHD, or why anorexia happens, or autism, all that kind of stuff, to understand codependency and attachment theory, jump over on there. It's psychology, I hope, made accessible.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. If you want to nerd up on your psychology, hop over to I Have Issues.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing. I've loved this conversation. For everybody else, thank you so much for listening today, and I'll see you next week on another episode of the Johnny Lawrence Podcast.